Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I'm your host, Nadia Bane. The top stories this week. The BRICS nations have entered a new era during their 15th annual summit. Discussions of the de-dollarization and the creation of a new currency took center stage. In Gabon, military leaders have seized control in the wake of President Ali Bongo's controversial election victory announcement. This coup unfolding in the oil-rich Central African nation raises concerns about potential impacts on global supply chains. Nigerian manufacturers are grappling with production and supply obstacles stemming from soaring costs of raw materials, energy, and a depreciating currency. Newly elected President Bola Tinubu's economic reforms have had considerable repercussions on the economy. In a significant development, the BRICS, which already represent a substantial 31.5% of the global GDP as of March 2023, have expanded with the admission of 6 new countries. This expansion comes with ambitious plans for new currency arrangements designed to lessen their dependence on the US dollar. But can BRICS truly reshape the world's economic landscape?
Following the 15th annual BRICS summit, Russian state media emphasized the potential decline of the US dollar's dominance and its impact on American economic influence. With the expansion of BRICS from 5 to 11 nations, one of the bloc's goals, amongst others, is to challenge the dollar's global supremacy. While not all 11 oppose the United States, they share criticism of the US-dominated Bretton Woods financial system. Consequently, the group is focusing on de-dollarization, aiming to settle global trade in currencies other than the US dollar. Despite the US dollar's share of official foreign exchange reserves falling to a 20-year low, it still dominates global trade, even though the Chinese renminbi has tried to position itself as an alternative. According to the People's Bank of China, nearly 80% of China-Africa trade in goods is settled in the Chinese yuan as de-dollarization gains traction in many African nations, a shift analysts say could safeguard African economies, potentially enhancing economic stability and regional integration. At the last BRICS summit in South Africa, Brazil's Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva advocated for a shared currency among BRICS nations. The countries agreed to explore the adoption of a benchmark currency for international trade within the bloc, highlighting their commitment to de-dollarization. As BRICS nations progress, observers wait to see whether it truly can challenge the dollar's dominance or if the global economic landscape will remain largely influenced by the greenback.
We're joined by Jean-Joseph Boileau, economist and Iris Institute advisor on emerging countries, for a deeper understanding of the situation. Mr. Boileau, welcome. Is a BRICS currency a viable project, or is it more about dethroning the dollar on a global scale?
The de-dollarization of the world economy does not only depend on the creation of an alternative competing currency, but on a whole series of small streams, sometimes large rivers, which aim to enable the countries of the South, not just the BRICS, but the whole world, to use currencies other than the dollar. So a lot of upstream work was done over the years between the two BRICS summits to try and understand how we could set up an international monetary system in which the dollar is no longer the essential architecture.
Un système monétaire international dans lequel le dollar n'est plus l'architecture essentielle.
Would you say that the BRICS will to de-dollarize is more about multipolarity than it is about dethroning the dollar?
Vous avez utilisé la bonne expression.
You've actually used the right words. We all know that the idea is to move away from unipolarity centered on the United States and towards multipolarity. In other words, the possibility that the world economy, but also in geopolitical terms, will be more balanced between the poles that carry a certain weight in world affairs. So there is a very important space that exists, and this space will therefore be for monetary multipolarity, giving the Indian rupee or yuan, etc., a more important role as an international currency.
Au yuan, etc. Un rôle de monnaie internationale plus important.
Our main interest here, Mr. Boileau, is to know what impacts this de-dollarization could have on the African continent and especially on African economies.
African countries that are striving to develop are so much indebted. And the problem is that most African debt is currently denominated in dollars. At the moment, you have a phenomenon linked to the explosion of American debt. American interest rates are rising sharply. So you can see that African countries are facing a twofold problem. Firstly, their interest rates are going to be higher. And secondly, the currency with which they repay their debts, the dollar, is more expensive. Africa is a major exporter of raw materials. All these raw materials are denominated in dollars in many African countries. You know better than I do, there is a kind of creeping dollarization. The dollar is replacing the national currency, and here again, that's a very bad sign. Because at that point, the national currency is finally discarded, and so there is no longer any possibility of a national monetary policy.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Jean-Joseph Boileau.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
In a recent upheaval, military leaders in oil-rich Gabon carried out a coup last week, bringing a wave of political instability to the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries' doorstep. While concerns about potential supply disruptions in the Central African country have emerged, it remains uncertain how this will impact the oil industry on a global scale. Take a look.
The coup d'etat in oil producer Gabon has raised concerns about potential supply disruptions in the Central African country. It produced over 200,000 barrels per day of crude oil in July. Though it remains uncertain how this will impact the oil industry, the political turmoil in the country has reverberated through international oil markets, propelling oil prices to a 5-day consecutive increase. Market experts are closely monitoring this complex interplay of geopolitical events and supply dynamics as it continues to impact the delicate balance of the global oil market. The situation is compounded by factors such as Saudi Arabia's production cut and a decrease in US oil stocks, which have amplified concerns about global oil supply. Sources suggest the military generals behind the coup do not intend to disrupt oil fields or production. Major oil companies, including Arcelor Energy, are reporting unaffected operations in Gabon. However, this situation serves as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness between political, economic stability and energy markets, underlining the need for vigilance in these uncertain times.
It is really important that African countries send, not just in words, but indeed a strong message on stability. We don't believe that having coups every other day is helpful for investments coming into Gabon and that market. And we as Africans have to be firm on these issues because it is going to be through democratic good governance.
In 2020, the oil sector accounted for 38.5% of GDP and 70.5% of exports in Gabon. As the situation unfolds, the global oil industry continues to navigate this complex landscape.
Firms in Nigeria are between a rock and a hard place. Since President Bola Tinubu's economic reforms, business owners are faced with high energy costs and a weakening local currency. The discontinuation of government subsidies on petrol and the unification of exchange rates have had a negative impact on the economy.
Nigerian manufacturers are facing challenges meeting up with production and supplies due to the high cost of raw materials, energy, and a weakening naira. Upon assumption of office, President Bola Tinubu, in his effort to reform the economy, introduced new policies that saw the removal of government subsidy on petrol, exchange rate unification, all of which have made the economy take a hit. Recently, the Director General, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Segun Ajayi Kadri, blamed the economic policy under President Tinubu's administration for the challenges manufacturers are facing.
We had to go back to our drawing tables to actually work on our logistics, the days and times when we go to deliver most of these our products to our clients. So if we're doing maybe 5 days a week, we had to cut it to, let's say, 3. And then we also worked on our working days because we also have to help our staff cost of transportation and everything.
Latest CEO's Confidence Index for Q2 23, which shows that the sector has been crippled by the impact of the weaker naira, with a nearly 30% decrease in sales for consumer goods and cement. Recently, the Nigerian president announced 75 billion naira grant for 75 enterprises, an amount stakeholders in the manufacturing sector say is not enough.
If the government can help increase the grants given to manufacturers, I think it will go a long way in strengthening the naira, and it will go a long way to bring to help in increasing exports, because manufacturing is the heart of every economy.
The money is small, considering the economic situation of the country. We know what the country is. We know the cost of fuel, cost of building materials, even manufacturing materials. So I feel like the money might not do much.
Analysts have warned that the government will need to ramp up economic actions to mitigate the effect of the current policy reforms on the labor and manufacturing sector, so as to boost investor confidence that can facilitate growth.
That's our program for this week. Thank you for joining us. I've been your host, Nadia Bane. For more business stories and news, stay tuned to Africanews and Africanews.com.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.